Is it curtains on the 2024 Seattle Mariners season, plus another questionable roster move in the last month of the year, all coming up on Bleav in Mariners. That's right. What is up, sports fans? What is up, Mariners fans? Schultzy, Jordon Schultz sitting in with you, a Pacific Northwest sports talk show host here, reacting to a very, very disappointing weekend series for the Seattle Mariners against the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim in California next to Disneyland. It's not really the point, though. There's 7 names. The point is that they beat the Mariners basically 7 different ways. It was very frustrating to see Seattle basically dropping another frustrating Angels series. It's kind of been the mark that they've had on them all season. Basically a record now of 5-8. Doesn't really matter who's your manager, Scott Service or Dan Wilson. The Seattle Mariners can't beat the Angels. So we're going to get into a little bit of that as well as preview the series. It's a 4-game set the Mariners have in Oakland, and recording this on Monday, kind of looking at the 4-game sets. Mariners 6 games out, now going into Oakland facing off against the A's. 6 games out in the AL West anyways. Of course, 5.5 games out in the wild card as well. So we'll kind of wrangle that into not only a preview of their series against the Oakland A's, but start the conversation. Is this really it for the Seattle Mariners in 2024? That seems to be the sentiment on Mariners Twitter, seems to be the sentiment that I've kind of heard locally here as I live in Portland, Oregon. I have a lot of Mariners fans that I talk to that are pretty frustrated, and my dad is just done watching him, and I feel like that's kind of a good barometer. It's like if my dad's willing to tune in, then they're still palatable. Once he's done, I feel like that's kind of the sign that everybody else is dropping off the cliff as well. Along with asking the question, are the Mariners' playoff chances really gone? I wanted to follow up with another roster question after Friday when I had questioned the decision to start Mitch Garver, a designated hitter. That happened again Saturday against the Angels in the loss for Seattle, by the way. But super frustrated to see that. And then that same day, Saturday over the weekend, the Mariners calling up Luis Urias again, a Jerry Dipoto mistake from this last offseason. We are now seeing again on the roster for the last month as they expand to 28 players from 26. So a little curious as to why that's happening. I feel like it proves my point that I made on Friday on the last episode of Bleav in Mariners, that there really is no consideration for what Dan Wilson needs as far as the roster go. It's more so what Jerry Dipoto wants, and he's trying basically to not have egg on his face. So we'll get into that and really kind of twist that into the question that I love that Aaron Levine asked on Fox 13. He had a great commentary over the weekend, basically wondering if Dan Wilson is Jerry Dipoto's firewall. I love the question. I think so. And frankly, I think more media members need to criticize the Seattle Mariners organization like this, like Aaron Levine did at this point. So we're going to get into a bunch here on Bleav in Mariners, all in a very short amount of time, starting with, of course, the very disappointing reaction to the Anaheim, Los Angeles Angels, whatever the hell you want to call them. I really just don't care at this point. But it's pretty frustrating to see such, once again, a great opportunity for Seattle basically wasted. You had, and this was pretty interesting to see. I don't think this has ever happened in Mariners franchise history before. You had a series, a 3-game series, mind you, in which the Seattle Mariners were facing off against 2 kids making their major league debut, right? First time in franchise history, the last time that they had faced 2 kids making their major league debut that close together, it was within, and this is per Mariners PR, appreciate them putting these numbers together, was within a 5-game span on April 6, 1978 versus Minnesota, and then April 10th at Oakland. Roger Erickson was the first rookie, and then John Henry Johnson. I don't know who either of those guys are, so if you do, let me know in a comment, or let me know, hit me up on Twitter as well. I love that bit of history basically took 45 years to be beaten now, and it's in a very hot playoff race for the Mariners. If they can have some success, they can catch the Houston Astros a little bit, make up some ground. Now, I get Houston's playing well, but you still need to win every game, and it's not just the AL West. It really was on Friday and Saturday. The Mariners had a really good chance to get within 3.5 games of the wild card within the Boston Red Sox and Minnesota Twins. So super frustrating that they could not take care of this, in my opinion, pretty easy opportunity against two kids making their major league debut on Friday. They did beat Samuel Aldegari. I apologize if I'm saying his name wrong. I already can't remember how to say it, but they pretty much smacked the hell out of the entire pitching staff around for the Angels on Friday. That was nice to see, but a much different story on Sunday. And I think that was kind of the game that broke everybody. Caden Dana, Sunday afternoon, tossing like a 6-inning gem, looking like he'd been out there for the entire season pitching against the Mariners. Mariners hitters striking out, 8-9 times? It kind of looked like that really crappy Seattle team that just doesn't hit. They strike out, they swing at bad pitches. They were just really unable to overcome crap at the plate, but mental errors as well. It just wasn't a good day overall, and obviously not a good series for the Mariners. The first series loss for new manager Dan Wilson, but East Coast Dems putting out this tweet, a really, really good information on the Mariners' futility against the Angels. Appreciate it. Yeah, finishing off the record of 5-8 against the Angels, starting off 4-0 against them this year, and then basically Joe Adell becoming the thorn in their side for the Mariners and finishing off with a record of 1-8 after that. Total strikeouts against 13 games. 106 for the Seattle Mariners hitters against a pitching staff that is 28th in MLB in terms of WAR. That's futility right there. When you ask, well, hey, what does a really bad team look like? The Seattle Mariners apparently cannot overcome a strikeout deficit against some of the worst pitching teams in Major League Baseball, the Angels being one of them. And only 13 runs put up by Mariners hitters in 8 losses against the Angels this season. It just more futility. And really at this point, just a lot of frustration. I mean, I saw a lot of fans pissed, just done watching. Like I don't expect every single person that said, on Twitter or on social media that like they're absolutely not going to tune in to a Mariners game anymore to hold to that. I think that there is going to be a week or two or something like that from now where maybe Seattle does have a little bit of a chance again, and those people are going to come back. I mean, I get it. I've been in this abusive relationship with the Seattle Mariners for the last 25 years of my life. So I'm with y'all. It's why one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast, but really just the overall sentiment of Mariners fans is just kind of being finished with this season. It's been quite an emotional ride and a frustrating one at that. Joe Doyle, MILB, putting this tweet out as well. Mariners 6 back of Houston and losing 8 of their last 9 contests against the 56-80 Los Angeles Angels, if there ever was a nail in the coffin. Yeah, that just really seems to be the growing sentiment around social media. So super frustrating to see. So you ask the question, are the Mariners absolutely done as far as the playoffs go? Statistically, no. StatCast does still have them with a 7.4% chance of making the playoffs, but that's the wild card. Essentially, that is what they would have to do, less than a 10% chance, what they would have to do to overcome these kinds of odds is just getting a lot harder and a lot harder. It's a lot more to overcome. We've got 25 games remaining the day that I tape this podcast, and their division winning chances, according to StatCast, are now under 3% at 2.9. That is not happening unless you come on against the Angels 3 games down on September 23rd all of a sudden and sweep them. It's not going to happen. I mean, tiny chance, but do you really expect Seattle to have some sort of success in any kind of crunch time this year? No, they haven't had any sort of success in games that aren't that important earlier in the season or against teams that are pretty essy, that can't hit, that can't pitch. And then the Mariners end up losing a lot to the Detroit Tigers, to the Anaheim Angels over and over and over. And hearing from Ryan Divish, I believe he said this on the Marine Layer pod, that series, just the Mariners looking so bad, so lackadaisical against the Detroit Tigers, was probably one of the reasons ultimately that Scott Service lost his job. And at this point in the season, you see effort, but mental mistakes like Julio and Luke Raley had on Sunday, a couple for Luke Raley, a fielding and a base running mistake, and then Julio throwing it basically to the wrong base, allowing a runner to get into scoring position at one point in the game. Mental mistakes like that cannot happen. So is this curtains on the 2024 Seattle Mariners season? No, but it's getting very close, and it certainly feels like it. So the sentiment amongst Mariners fans that it is, I understand. I'm not quite yet there myself. I'm sick like I'm disgusting. I have a Mariners teal green sickness where I do think all of a sudden they could come back and do something, but I'm realistic as well. And yeah, the chances are getting so much smaller, and they're running out of time. Once again, to quote Jack Bauer, it's getting even more slim, time is. So, you know what? I hope they can put some sort of a run together, but really frustrated to see the Mariners looking so bad under Dan Wilson and Edgar Martinez over the weekend, because everybody last week, including myself in some respects, was kind of thinking, hey, the vibe had changed a little bit. The guys not necessarily like totally able to change their hitting approach within 2 weeks, but they are able to get like, that gritty approach, kind of maybe refocus a little bit. Dan Wilson did tell the kids, hey, we're going to war each time that we're going out there on the field every game. Be ready. Josh Rojas said that fired him up, and it sounds like a lot of guys had been lacking a little bit of fire with Scott Service in the clubhouse as manager all season. But even under Dan Wilson and 6 of these Angels losses, just 1 run, by the way. Unbelievable. Once again, just futile. That's kind of the word of the podcast is futility for the Seattle Mariners, right? And you just go back to social media when I see a collective of fans just begging for something good to happen. Please tie the game, please, please. And I feel it. I'm not making fun of you. I feel it. It just kind of tells me, the season is pretty close to over. And I don't think you can blame Dan Wilson. I think you kind of go to, once again, the roster construction that the Seattle Mariners have had under president and old general manager Jerry Dipoto. Now Justin Hollander is general manager. You go to the lack of money. It's, John Stanton's not letting the Mariners spend essentially on good players, never allowing them to bring great hitters in, always kind of touting, hey, we've got a great pitching staff and we've got our farm system, even though the farm system isn't hitting at the major league level. So is this Dan Wilson's fault? It's hard to say it is, but it's really frustrating, to see him walk into a situation with basically a roster full of futility. And one of those players showed themselves again this weekend. I cannot believe the Mariners, of course, every team on September 1st can expand their rosters from 26 to 28 players, and they decided to make a little bit of a change as far as adding a hitter and taking a pitcher away, because they were adding a couple of more pitchers in Jonathan Diaz and Edward Bizardo to the roster for the expanded September rosters, essentially taking Gabe Spire off, putting him either on the injured list or back into AAA, and recalling third baseman, everybody's favorite, and I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, Luis Urias. And it's kind of funny to see him wearing Ty France's old number in 23. I don't know if that was a shot to him, like to Ty, or if the Mariners were trying to like throw a shot at Ty. That's just weird that a guy that's most likely not going to be here next year was just kind of handed number 23. I don't think 16, his old number, is being used. So I guess that must have been a him thing. Just a weird thing that I noticed. But dude batting like a $150, all of a sudden called back up at third base, and Dan Wilson saying, hey, and starting at third base on Saturday in the loss to the Angels, and Dan Wilson saying, hey, yeah, this might be kind of a platoon that we're looking at with Dylan Moore and Josh Rojas being at third base in the last month and a half. Now, Luis Urias kind of stepping into that spot and essentially making the Mariners like 3 deep at both third base and shortstop, with Dylan Moore there able to play third as well, which I guess, as far as positional flexibility goes on defense, that's a great move. And the Mariners love those kinds of guys, but he's a terrible hitter. He's an ass hitter. And I cannot believe we are once again talking about Seattle giving it bats to an ass hitter in the month of September. I asked the question why Jerry Dipoto would want to give it bats to Mitch Garver on August 30th. Luckily, he got a double and a couple of ribbies, but then the next day, Saturday, I think struck out again and went 0 for 3 or 0 for 4. Could not believe Dan Wilson left him in for late game at bats. I guess he's a designated hitter, so you kind of have to eliminate some roster flexibility if you just throw a guy in at designated hitter off your bench. But unless he's like pinch running, it's so frustrating. So frustrating to not only see Mitch Garver basically still getting at bats, but right after Mariners fans are bitching about that, Luis Urias gets called up for roster expansion in September, and he's given playing time. I cannot believe he's not just a defensive replacement. And it once again just tells me that Jerry Dipoto is trying to avoid having to admit that the moves that he has made have been a mistake. There's no reason Luis Urias should be getting at bats other than Jerry Dipoto sitting there being like, if he gets us a couple of big hits, then I bet you fans won't really remember the crappy season he had. No, you wasted at bats. You wasted time. He hasn't even played that much for Seattle. I mean, I'm frankly bitching about like this year's, like Tommy La Stella only got like a month of playing time last year. I'm basically bitching about this year's AJ Pollock, right? Like nobody expected this guy to come in and light the world on fire, but apparently Jerry Dipoto thought, oh, he's going to hit 230. He's going to hit 15 or 20 home runs. I'm going to see him replicate that season from 2019 and whatever the hell it was, or 2021. And it's like, nah, a lot of fans don't believe that. And is this the hubris of Jerry Dipoto? Is it John Stanton, without the big old pockets that Mariners fans want him to have, forcing Jerry Dipoto into this situation? I would say it's a little bit of both. And I think the disdain for either party in this regard is pretty understandable and pretty legitimate. And speaking of legitimate concerns of Jerry Dipoto and John Stanton, or anybody in the Seattle Mariners front office brass at this point, I think most criticisms to the baseball operations department, that they're all pretty valid. Really great commentary done by Fox 13 Seattle's Aaron Levine was posted on Sunday. He basically did the commentary on his news segment that day and then posted the video. And then you got the basically the transcript as an article as well. And kind of scathing questions that he's asking the Seattle Mariners front office people of, wondering if Dan Wilson is essentially Jerry Dipoto's firewall, kind of hoping that the hiring of Dan Wilson ensures Jerry Dipoto's job for next year. Essentially, once again, really great stuff by Aaron Levine, says that the Mariners forced into a situation, of course, to fire Scott Service with the way that they had been playing. And I mean, we kind of talked about it when Dan Wilson wasn't named the interim manager. He was the full-time manager. Aaron Levine pointing out that, if Manny Acta had been promoted to interim manager, a new GM could have came in to clean house and just made it easy to kind of start all over and have a new regime. But with Dan Wilson, a beloved franchise figure, kind of this, break in case of emergency axe in that glass case plan that I was saying Jerry Dipoto has, because the dude's smart. He's shrewd. He got to being a general manager and a president in baseball. You don't do that if you're dumb. You've got to be calculated. You've got to be very smart. So you kind of feel like that this plan in the back pocket of Jerry Dipoto was specifically for what Aaron Levine is talking about here. And it is that he wants to save his job, right? It ensures that John Stanton kind of is forced into, at least we would think from the view, we would think from the opinion of like a new GM coming in, it would be much harder to, do anything with a manager that you haven't chosen. So why would you want to take this job? So it'd be kind of easier just for John Stanton, turn to Jerry Dipoto and say, well, I'm not sure I want to go through all that work and look at a very small list of candidates for a general manager. So you know what? Yeah, we'll run it back with you. You've done some positive things for us, and let's see where Dan Wilson can take us. It kind of feels like that's what Jerry Dipoto is doing here. I agree with Aaron Levine, and frankly, at this point, if John Stanton isn't identifying that and unwilling to pay for better hitters after seeing what Jerry Dipoto had to do to save his job, I understand that John Stanton's a rich dude. He doesn't live like the rest of us. He's a billionaire. He doesn't really feel like you and I as a Mariners fan feel every single day. But if he isn't spotting that and doesn't know that that's what's happening, then he's a stupid man. And that's certainly frustrating to if that is the case, to know that a stupid man is the Mariners owner or the majority owner in John Stanton right now. So, I mean, I really do love this. This quote to me, this is Aaron Levine talking in the commentary. To me, at least, it means that the likelihood of Dipoto remaining in his position for at least one more season is pretty high, whether he deserves it or not. I love Aaron Levine calling Jerry Dipoto the silver tongue. The silver tongue himself could make a pretty compelling case that they played decent baseball under Wilson, but just didn't have enough time to make up the ground they needed to. And he goes on to say, what I'm saying is the minute Dan Wilson became full-time manager for the Mariners, he instantly became a firewall for Jerry Dipoto's future in Seattle. And essentially, Dipoto, with the Dan Wilson hire, very smartly and shrewdly bought himself another year as Mariners general manager, president, whatever the hell you want to call him. He's the president now, but he still makes all the GM moves. So I love the point by Aaron Levine. Appreciate him throwing this commentary out there. Some very scathing comments about the Mariners front office. And essentially, fans, they want to feel bad for Dan Wilson being put in this situation. I kind of do too, but I also, once again, with this pointed out in the article, I don't really feel like either Jerry Dipoto or John Stanton can actually feel like they can fire Dan Wilson, because fans really would revolt. Wilson being hired was kind of a little pull on the heartstrings move, like, hey, come and buy some number 6 Dan Wilson jerseys again. Hey, remember the days in 1995? We got the good vibes. If they destroyed that, then yeah, Mariners season ticket holders would revolt, and there'd be nobody in the stands after Dan Wilson was fired. So yeah, Jerry Dipoto saving his job, essentially, according to Aaron Levine, by hiring Dan Wilson. And I agree. Yes, Dan Wilson is Jerry Dipoto's firewall. Super frustrating to know that is why such a legend was able to get his job. But hey, maybe Dan Wilson can make lemonade out of lemons. I certainly think he can. And Lou Piniella, former Mariners manager, on Old Timers Day at Yankee Stadium a couple of weeks ago, told The Athletic, hey, I told the Mariners years ago they should hire Dan Wilson as manager, Edgar Martinez as your hitting coach, and you hire Jay Buhner as like your bench coach or your third base coach. Well, Lou Piniella got 2 of his 3 wishes. Be awesome to see Buhner in the dugout as well. I mean, I'll take the whole 95 roster at this point. Like, I don't care. That nostalgia, honestly, as an M's fan, is something that would keep me going at this point. And yeah, playing into the point, Jerry Dipoto knows that. So, but hopefully Dan Wilson will be able to have some success and make some lemonade out of lemons. All right, we got to get out of here really quickly, though, previewing the A's series, Seattle in Oakland for a 4-game set against the Athletics. I'm so excited to watch all the games in that empty stadium. It's going to be pretty fun to hopefully catch. I want to hear what players are saying, and if it's super quiet like that, usually you can catch it on the mics. So super stoked to hear that. But Monday through Thursday, hopefully the Mariners can get it done against the Oakland Athletics and try to save their season. Batting WRC plus, the Mariners are 10th in the American League. The Athletics are actually 6th. So they are a worse batting team than the Oakland Athletics. Not surprising. The Mariners strike out a lot. Their fielding FRV score is slightly better than Oakland's, a -6 for the Mariners, a -38 for the Athletics. That's 10th for the Mariners as compared to 14th for Oakland. Starting pitching FIP minus numbers, the Mariners, of course, one of the best in the league at that, third with a 90, and then the Athletics 14th with a 113. Just kind of some mediocre scores. They're not terrible for Oakland, much better than they were last season. And then their bullpen actually much better than Seattle's overall FIP minus. That is 5th in the American League as opposed to the Mariners 10th. So slightly better for Oakland as far as the stats go. And on paper, you would think that Oakland actually has a chance to win this series, but maybe Seattle can get it done. The A's, though, unfortunately, one of the best teams since the All-Star break, 22-17. And thanks for Lookout Landing for putting these numbers together. 22-17 with a +10 run differential in the second half. So I hope the Mariners can get it done, but not feeling too great. It's why I'm wondering, just like everybody else, if it really is curtains on the Seattle Mariners season for 2024. All right, that's going to do it for this latest episode of Bleav in Mariners. Hoping to have an interview on the program this week. Excited out to a couple of people that wrote a couple of articles recently that I wanted to dive into and have them on to ask some questions with, maybe hear, about some stuff that they didn't get to in those articles, talking about some scathing Mariner stuff at the top of the front office. It's a lot of drama, and I you know what? Even though my team is suffering, I am here for the drama. I will say that. And of course, we are out to a former player to come on, be a co-host on the podcast. Would love to, if you are a former Seattle Mariner listening to the show or watching it on YouTube, or you were listening and you know a former Seattle Mariner player that wants a media opportunity, get in contact with me, get in contact with Bleav, and we'll get in touch. We'll make it happen for you. But appreciate everybody tuning in. That's going to do it for this episode of Bleav in Mariners. Make sure you give the podcast a 5-star rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Seriously, the reviews, if you leave a comment with that 5-star review, it helps even more. And if you're on YouTube, would really appreciate subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment there as well. YouTube loves all that interaction. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully, we're talking about some effing wins the next time I see you on Wednesday. Stay safe and keep those tridents up. See you soon.